There is a piece of CCTV footage from 1993 that still feels impossible to watch. It is blurry, silent, ordinary. A shopping center, people walking, a child in a blue coat, and beside him, two older boys. At first, nothing looks unusual. That is what makes it terrifying. Because nobody watching in that moment knew they were seeing the last known images of 2-year-old James Bulger alive. Nobody knew that within hours, a missing child case would become one of the most disturbing murder investigations in British history. And nobody could imagine the answer detectives were about to uncover. The suspects were not grown men. They were not hardened criminals. They were children, 10 years old. So the question became bigger than one crime. How does a child become capable of murder? Could anyone have stopped it? And when the killers are children themselves, what does justice even mean? Today, we reopen the case file, step by step, not to sensationalize the pain of a family, but to understand the evidence, the investigation, and the unanswered questions that still haunt this case more than 30 years later. February 12, 1993. Bootle, Merseyside. The New Strand shopping center was busy with the ordinary rhythm of a Friday afternoon. Parents, workers, shoppers, children. Nothing about the day announced itself as historic. Nothing warned anyone that one family's life was about to be torn apart. Denise Bulger had gone shopping with her 2-year-old son, James. James was just weeks away from his 3rd birthday. He was at the age where children are curious about everything. They wander, they pause, they reach for things. They move faster than adults expect. Inside the shopping center, Denise entered a butcher's shop. For a brief moment, James was near the doorway. Then he was gone. At first, the mind does not go to the worst place. A parent thinks, he must be close. He must have stepped around a corner. Someone must have seen him. But seconds become minutes. Minutes become panic. Security is alerted. Staff begin searching. Police are called. A missing toddler in a crowded shopping center means every exit matters. Every witness matters. Every minute matters. And this is the first painful detail of the case. James disappeared in public. Not from a remote road, not from a dark alley, not in the middle of the night. He disappeared in daylight, surrounded by people. That fact would later make the case feel even more frightening because it suggested something people do not want to admit. Danger does not always look like danger when it is happening. Sometimes it looks ordinary.
Detectives needed a starting point. In a modern investigation, CCTV is expected. But in 1993, surveillance footage was not as sharp, not as widespread, and not as easy to review as it is today. Still, the shopping center had cameras, and when investigators looked through the footage, they found the moment. James Bulger was seen leaving the shopping center, but he was not alone. 2 boys were with him. One appeared to be holding his hand. That image changed everything. Now investigators were not only searching for a lost child, they were searching for 2 children who had taken him. And here is where the case becomes almost impossible to process. If an adult had been seen leading James away, witnesses may have reacted differently. People might have felt immediate suspicion. But 2 boys with a younger child? That could look like siblings, cousins, kids playing, a family moment that did not need interference. The disguise was not a mask. It was childhood itself. As a narrator, that is one of the details I keep coming back to. Not because it explains the crime, but because it explains how it could happen in plain sight. The world saw children and assumed innocence. The camera saw more. Once police had the CCTV, they began reconstructing the route. This was not a quick disappearance. James was led away from the shopping center and taken through the streets of Bootle and Liverpool. The walk was long, around 2 miles. Think about that for a moment. A 2-year-old child walking for that distance with 2 older boys through public areas, past people, past roads, past homes, past chances. Later, witnesses would remember seeing them. Some noticed James crying, some noticed the boys, some thought something seemed wrong, but not wrong enough to stop everything. And this is one of the cruelest parts of the case, because after the truth is known, every missed moment becomes unbearable. You start asking, why didn't someone intervene? Why didn't someone ask more questions? Why didn't someone take James by the hand and call police? But real life does not happen with dramatic music underneath it. People are busy. People doubt themselves. People avoid assuming the worst. And when children are involved, adults often hesitate to accuse them of wrongdoing. That hesitation became part of the tragedy, not because ordinary witnesses were responsible for the crime, but because the case exposed how easily people can misread danger when it does not match the shape they expect. Detectives now had a terrible puzzle: a missing toddler, 2 unidentified boys, a route through public streets, and a clock that was running out.
2 days later, James's body was found near a railway line in Walton, Liverpool. The search ended in the worst possible way. From that moment, the case became a murder investigation. The details of James's death were horrific, and we do not need to describe them graphically to understand the cruelty of what happened. What matters is this: James was attacked, killed, and left near the tracks. A little boy who should have been safe with his family became the victim of an act so brutal that the entire country struggled to understand it. Police now had to answer the central question: who were the boys on the CCTV? The footage was released. The public was asked for help. Tips began coming in, and soon, attention turned toward 2 local 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables. They were arrested. And suddenly, Britain was forced to confront a reality that felt almost impossible. The suspects were children, not teenagers, not young adults. Children. Both were 10 at the time of the murder. Under English law, they were old enough to be charged, but emotionally, socially, morally, the question was much more complicated. Could children that young fully understand the meaning of murder? Could they understand death as permanent? Could they understand the suffering they caused? And even if their understanding was incomplete, did that change their responsibility? This is where the case becomes more than a case. It becomes a moral earthquake.
When detectives questioned Thompson and Venables, they were not dealing with ordinary suspects. They were dealing with children who were old enough to speak, lie, deflect, and react, but young enough that every interview carried enormous psychological weight. The police interviews became a major part of the evidence. Investigators had to compare what the boys said with the forensic evidence, witness accounts, and CCTV timeline. In detective work, stories matter. Not because every story is true, but because lies often reveal pressure points. Who changes their version? Who knows details they should not know? Who blames the other? Who shows fear, confusion, calculation, or remorse? The case against them grew from layers of evidence. There was the CCTV. There were witnesses. There was forensic evidence. There were the interviews. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. And yet, even with evidence, the emotional question stayed unresolved. How do two 10-year-old boys become part of something this violent? Some reports and later commentary looked at their backgrounds. People searched for explanations in family life, exposure to violence, neglect, emotional disturbance, and peer dynamics. But explanation is dangerous territory, because when we explain, some people hear excuse, and this case does not allow excuses. James was 2. He was defenseless. He deserved protection. At the same time, if society refuses to ask how children become violent, then it learns nothing. That is the uncomfortable balance. We can hold offenders responsible and still ask what failed before the crime. Those two ideas can exist together.
In November 1993, Robert Thompson and John Venables stood trial. By then, they were 11 years old. The image of two young boys in a courtroom accused of murdering a toddler became one of the defining images of the case. The trial lasted weeks. The prosecution laid out the route, the evidence, the witness sightings, the forensic findings, and the boys' police interviews. The courtroom was not only judging two defendants, it felt as if the country was judging an idea, the idea of childhood innocence. Because if children could do this, what did that mean? The boys were found guilty of murder on November 24, 1993. They became among the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. The reaction was immediate and intense. Many people believed the punishment should be severe, even lifelong. Others believed that, because of their age, rehabilitation had to remain central. There was anger, there was grief, there was confusion. And there was James's family, living through all of it in public. That is another part of true crime we should never forget. For viewers, a case can become a debate. For families, it is not a debate, it is a wound. Every headline, every argument, every documentary, every retelling brings back a child who should still be alive. After their conviction, Thompson and Venables were detained. Years later, both were released with new identities. That decision caused outrage among many members of the public. To some, it felt like the system had protected the killers more than the victim. To others, it reflected a justice system built on the belief that children, even children who commit terrible crimes, are still capable of change. This is where the case refuses to be simple. If justice means punishment, was their sentence enough? If justice means rehabilitation, how do we measure whether it worked? If justice means public safety, how much risk is acceptable? And if justice means honoring James, what does that require? These are not easy questions. Personally, I think the hardest part is that every answer feels incomplete. A harsher sentence does not bring James back. A rehabilitative sentence does not erase what happened. Public anger is understandable, but law cannot operate only on anger. At the same time, compassion for child offenders cannot be allowed to overshadow compassion for the child who died. That is the line this case keeps forcing us to walk, and it is a narrow line. After release, Robert Thompson stayed largely out of public attention. John Venables did not. Venables was later recalled to prison, including for offenses involving child abuse images. For many people, that confirmed their worst fears. It reopened the debate over whether he should ever have been released, and whether some offenders remain dangerous, no matter what interventions are offered. But it also created a strange contrast. Two boys committed the same terrible crime. Years later, their paths appeared very different. One seemingly disappeared into a quiet life. The other returned to prison. That difference complicates the story. It suggests that even in the same case, even with the same conviction, even with the same public hatred, outcomes can diverge. And for a justice system, that matters.
Because the system has to judge not only what someone did, but what risk they pose now. But for the public, especially in a case like this, that can feel almost impossible to accept. People do not want risk assessment. They want certainty. They want moral clarity. They want to know that evil was identified and locked away forever. But real cases rarely give us that comfort. Why does the James Bulger case remain so powerful? Many murders are tragic, many cases are shocking, but this one became fixed in public memory. Part of it was James's age. Part of it was the age of the killers. Part of it was the public nature of the abduction. But perhaps the strongest reason is the CCTV. That footage gave the case an image, a moment, a visual symbol of everything people feared. A child being led away, a crime beginning in silence, a crowd nearby unaware. The image is haunting because it captures the last moment when the ending could still have been different. And that is what makes it feel unbearable. When we watch it, we want to step into the frame. We want to stop the boys. We want to pick James up. We want to warn his mother. But the past is sealed. All we can do is study it. And maybe that is why true crime holds people's attention. Not because people enjoy tragedy, but because they are trying to understand how tragedy happens. They are looking for the missed clue, the warning sign, the lesson, the thing that might stop the next case. The James Bulger case teaches several uncomfortable lessons. First, danger does not always look like what we expect. Second, children are not automatically harmless. Third, public spaces can create false comfort. Fourth, justice becomes painfully complicated when offenders are young. And fifth, the victim must remain at the center. That last point matters most, because over time, cases like this can become arguments about killers. Were they evil? Were they damaged? Were they punished enough? Were they rehabilitated? Should their identities be protected? Those questions matter, but they can accidentally push the victim into the background. James Bulger was not just a symbol. He was a little boy. He had a mother, a father, a family, a future. The crime matters because James mattered. And any retelling of this case should begin and end with that. On February 12th, 1993, a mother went shopping with her son. By the end of that day, one family's world had changed forever. The CCTV gave detectives their first major clue. The investigation gave the country answers. But the answers did not bring peace. Because some cases are solved legally, but remain unsolved emotionally. We know who took James. We know where they went. We know what happened. But the question beneath it all still echoes. How could children do this? Maybe there is no single answer. Maybe the truth is a combination of personal failure, family failure, social failure, and something darker inside the human mind. But whatever explanations we search for, one truth stays clear. James Bulger should have grown up. He should have had birthdays, school days, ordinary days, a life beyond a grainy CCTV image. And that is why this case still matters. Not because it is shocking, but because it reminds us how fragile safety can be, how costly hesitation can be, and how important it is to pay attention when something feels wrong. Sometimes the clue is not hidden. Sometimes It is walking right in front of us.
If you made it to the end, I want to ask you something difficult. When children commit a crime this serious, should the justice system treat them as children first or as killers first? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more documentary-style investigations told step by step like a case file being reopened, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because in the next story, we will follow another case where the evidence solved the crime, but left behind a question no one could easily answer.